Today is July 30th, 2024, 11 o'clock a.m., and we are interviewing Dr. Kenneth Stewart, also known as Ken Stewart, related to his 30-year career here at Frostburg State College and Frostburg State University. Interviewer is Lisa Zakharova, Special Collections Librarian Archivist. Okay, Ken, can you please introduce yourself?
Okay. Briefly, I'm a poor cotton mill kid who grew up in North Carolina, and with a series of unbelievable events, managed to go to Duke University. And then I'd go on and get a PhD at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And I still find myself amazed that I got those opportunities. And along the way, I had an awful lot of good people who made a big difference in my life. So that's who I am, basically. Before I came to Frostburg State, my first job was at the Medical College of Georgia. I was hired straight out of as I completed my PhD, to come in and actually serve as the psychologist on an inpatient ward. And that was kind of unusual to get that kind of opportunity. Normally you'd get some supervision, more supervision than what they were planning for me. So my first job with the Medical College of Georgia, spent 5 years, and went extremely well. And then I wanted to do something for poor kids, and in this case, I'd been doing evaluations over in Aiken County, South Carolina, of kids and interviewing parents and working with teachers and so on. So I wrote what's called a Guns and Butter grant. LBJ decided he was going to integrate Southern schools by putting together a program that would support model and exemplary educational projects. And I did one of those grants, and we put that in place, and I left the medical college. And only worked on it until I got it established, and the program that reached out from our services, a comprehensive set of services, to the kids still exists. From there, Augusta College came to me and asked me to come and be their department head. They gave me a set of reasons, most of which were lies. And that's all it was. It was a big set of lies. They had messed up, given a professor who was the department head tenure and then fired him as department head. Incredibly mixed up mess. And I tried to give them solutions and went all the way to the vice chancellor, and they couldn't do what I asked them to do, so I said bye-bye. And I did that without a job. Now I'm said bye-bye. And in less than 2 weeks, I had 2 phone calls out of the blue, one of which was to become a chief psychologist at the Veterans Hospital in the Augusta area, which it was just kind of like an absolute shock. Big salary for those days. $23,000 was a big salary in that time. And I couldn't believe it. You know, the guy, I thought he wanted me to come over and just talk about things in general. And we get to the end of the conversation. He said, I want to offer you this job. I'm not even going to advertise it. So I had to go home and think about that. But I got another call from someone here at Frostburg State, a psychology professor who happened to work with me at Augusta College, calls me up and says, we got the best job I've ever seen for you. He said, you're perfect fit and we need you. And so anyway, he talked me into coming up for an interview. So I came up, was interviewed, and the end of the day of the interview, after talking to the department head and Nelson Guile, who was the brand new president of Frostburg State, when I met him, he had his hands full. And especially with me. I kind of grilled him during the interview. It wasn't just one way. And anyhow, um, he hired me as a full professor. We got to that part of it. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to keep me sort of under his thumb, I think. And I said, no. I said, what I told Bob was, I'll come as a full professor or I won't come. And so he reluctantly said, oh, okay. So I came in as a full professor. I didn't want to have to worry about, having to move up the ladder and, and have all of the interference with your actual work of having to do those kinds of things. And right off the bat, he decided to get his money's worth out of me. Nelson put me on the fiscal committee as his representative, other than the vice president, who was the chair of the committee. And he also put me on the graduate studies committee, and that made sense because I was being hired to develop a psychology graduate program. And so I became a member of the graduate studies committee and a member of the fiscal committee right off the bat. And this old cotton mill kid hit the ground running. That's the only way to describe it. I go to meetings, I speak up. I hear things that don't make sense to me from the point of view of making this a really good university eventually, making good programs, especially graduate programs. And so I challenged the faculty who were here whenever I saw things happening that I felt were going down the wrong path. Quick example on that. One of the existing graduate programs, their head made a proposal to lower the admissions requirement for graduate school down to a C. And I was offended by that. I'm a member of the graduate faculty, so I stood up. And I said, don't you understand that the quality of what happens in a classroom is not just about you as a teacher, it's about the quality of student that you get. And I said, you're saying we'll take anything. I said, in today's environment, a B is average. And it's going to continue that way. And so the graduate faculty agreed with me. Next thing I know, the next year, I'm elected president of the faculty assembly.
And this was 1 year after you came.
1 year, they elected me the very next year. And so that was a shocker. But it happened, and I took it on. And the most important thing about that is I ran the thing the way I like for things to be run. My way of approaching that was essentially, you've got an agenda, and you move through your agenda, and you don't mess around in ways that waste 200 faculty members' time. And I had a lot of resistance. We had some folks who, I won't be as harsh as I could be, but basically what it boiled down to, we always had a part where Nelson got a chance to speak before anything else happened in the meeting. And we'd have this long list of things that we had to take care of to clean up a whole lot of stuff that had happened before I came and that everybody wanted cleaned up, most of the faculty anyway. So we'd have some people who would stand up whenever Nelson finished his stuff and start giving their speech. And they would go there as long as they could prolong the conversation with Nelson. And they were basically selling something they wanted to sell individually. And I went to Nelson and I said, Nelson, this isn't working. I said, I'm going to give you, I think what we should do is give you just 20 minutes. You do your thing for 20 minutes and take the questions. But then we need to move on to our business. I said, we just have too much to do. And Nelson took it fine. He just he said, that's fine with me. And so The next meeting, same thing happened. One of the chief offenders did the same thing that he usually did, started engaging in a personal agenda at the end of Nelson's talk. And I interrupted. And I said, well, it's time to move on to the rest of the assembly's business. And Nelson accepted it, and he left. And this guy, he obviously, I could tell he was angry about it, but he sat down. And we did our business. And I'm standing up front at the end of that meeting. And he comes up. He's a big man, at least very tall, and moves as close as he can. He's almost chest to chest touching, looking down on me. Very physically threatening. And I looked up at him and I said, you don't have any idea how you're affecting me. Standing over the top of me like this, I said, you better step back right now, or else you're going to regret it. And he looked a little shocked, like he was trying to process it. And he stepped back. And I said, now, what do you have to say to me? And he started complaining. I said, that's a done thing. The only thing you can do right now about that, it's not going to do it with me. You've got to get enough people to vote to do these meetings the way you want them done. And of course, he couldn't do that. Nobody would even second his motion. So that was like my major victory of the first couple of years, was standing up to some of the unnecessary self-serving stuff. And so that was basically it. Beyond that point, I continued with the fiscal committee and I continued on graduate studies. And that was an excellent introduction. It was incredible how much Nelson's putting me on those two committees made my career. It was like I learned in those two committees everything you could possibly learn about the institution at that time, because much of the action is really about budget and resources and competition among departments and with other schools and all of that. And then there's a graduate program, and that part of it has to do with actually doing what we want to do, is become a university. Not just another college sitting around somewhere. We wanted to be a university. So that was the beginning. I don't know whether I've said enough about all that.
No, that was great. Yeah, I also, later on, a question that I'd like to ask is, a comparison, because you spent some time talking about Nelson P. Guild, who was the president when you arrived. Mm-hmm. And before that, I believe Guild was the provost, but he was one of the longest serving presidents at Frostburg State University, the second longest serving, only to Dunkel. Mm-hmm. But I would like to, first I want to clarify, so you arrived in 1970, and you arrived, one of the purposes of your hiring was Nelson P. Guild, like you said, asked for you to create from scratch the master's program in psychology.
That's right.
So you did that, and you established yourself very quickly. And so we'll skip forward after 1970, the early 70s. We're going to skip forward to about 1986. So we're going to talk about
the year of the herb.
The year of the herb. So we're going to focus on your experiences with Dr. Herb F. Reinhard Jr., president of Frostburg State College, and then later Frostburg State University. Mm-hmm. And he served he was the 12th president of the institution, and he served for about 4 years, 1986 to 1991. He was one of the chief architects of changing the institution from Frostburg State College to Frostburg State University in 1987, subsequently joining the University System of Maryland in 1988. Other major accomplishments included securing funding for what would become the Peeler Performing Arts Center, initiating a salary equity study for women faculty, followed up by approving substantial funding for faculty in general, and the highly successful Campaign for Excellence fundraising campaign. However, it was marked with some scandal, which we will get into. Despite these accomplishments, what he is probably most known for is his scandalous resignation in 1990. So you are here today to talk about your experiences with Herb Reinhard.
I had the full range.
Yes, you did.
My first experience was the faculty. There were two committees involved in hiring her. The faculty had its own committee on campus, and we interviewed all the candidates, well, a total of 6, and made our recommendation. But the Board of Trustees had its own committee. We had one faculty member on their committee who was Al Rose, incredible faculty member here at Frostburg State. In so many ways, I could talk about Al the length of what's supposed to be this interview. But and so at some point I'll do that. But the thing was, we did all these interviews, and then we get to Herb. He was somewhere towards the end of the group of 6. I don't remember whether he was 5th or 6th, something like that. He may have been the last. And we're going through the usual process. And Herb says, well, I just want to tell you something, you people. If you want me, you're going to have to hire me right away, or I'm out of here. Like that. Mm-hmm. I don't even need to talk about that kind of behavior. I went back after that meeting to the psychology department. And one of my colleagues was always hanging around after these kinds of things because he was always curious. And so he says, well, what about this one? And I said, well, I'll just say this. What you see is what you'll get. And he didn't know what I meant, and that's fine. I said, he's straightforward, or something like that. He speaks his mind, a little bit of that kind of stuff. I, of course, was totally turned off by him. To me, that was arrogant. I mean, truly arrogant. I don't mean just about everybody with a PhD has some arrogance. Okay, Herb was another thing. Anyhow, it wasn't that long after that, Herb was hired.
Just one question about the interview process. So I wanted to
He was number 5 out of 6.
5 out of 6, yes.
And he didn't make my final 5.
So why do you think that the Board of Regents ultimately decided on Dr. Reinhard?
Oh, I know exactly why. Because we did have Al Rose on the committee with the Board of Regents. He was our on the board representative, and Al told me exactly what they said. Among other things, they said my top candidate, which I think was second on the list overall, my top candidate was a woman who was terrific in every way, done her homework, extremely bright, capable person with provost experience before. And but anyway, what the chairman of the Board of Trustees said about her was she was an intellectual elite who did not belong in an institution like Frostburg State. She couldn't lead that kind of institution or something like that. And anyway, that's enough to turn me off of that particular attitude. But as far as why they hired Herb, Al told me that they wanted Herb because they believed that Frostburg State needed to be woke up. And said something like, that sleepy institution out there needs to be woke up. And
to his credit, I suppose he did in many ways.
yes, as a matter of fact, a whole lot of people got a lot less sleep, but it was mostly the people that had to report directly to him. He was well, half the time, from my point of view, he was so impulsive. If he got a thought in his mind and he wanted something done, he just said it. And if it didn't get done right away, the way he wanted it done, he'd get angry about it. Now that's what working for Herb was like. And I had an experience with that before I even began working directly for him. I had an experience in which, after he became president, one of my faculty, I was department chair at the time, in psychology, came to me and very upset. And she said Herb had just called her and insisted that she serve on yet another university-wide task force for Alice Manicure. And Pat was already on 2 university-wide task force.
And Alice Manicure, she was the dean
Vice
of the
president
college,
for
and later
student educational services later.
Yeah. Student affairs.
Alice kind of behaved as though, well, Alice was a nationally known figure and did wonderful things with her part, but she assumed too much about ownership over faculty that she wanted to work for her, from my point of view. There was no consideration given when she would reach in and try to do these things. So she already had Pat on 2 of her committees, and we had just assigned Pat the job of developing a laboratory experience and training undergraduate lab instructors, student assistants, to add a kind of a research experience to our general psych course. And that was a big task in itself that she was supposed to do for the department. So I was upset by it. I felt like it was unfair to Pat. She was very intimidated by the call. She told me, she said, I can't challenge him. I can't refuse. He'll fire me. That's how intimidated she was. And, that meant to me that I was the one who's going to have to do something if anything is going to be done. And I asked her, is it okay if I write him and describe for the department, complaint on the part of the department, that this reaching in and taking her at a critical point didn't work for us. And she said, I think that'll be okay. So I did that. I wrote a memo. And from my point of view, it was strictly professional. It basically described the impact on the department. And in it, I offered the names of 3 other psychology faculty that Alice could use. None of them had those kinds of responsibilities that Pat had. The very next day, you know me, Lisa. I go walking still at age 90. And back then, I was running typically a minimum of 7 miles a day during my noon hour. And on this particular day, the only person who showed up for our noontime run was Don Smith. Now, Don was the Dean of Arts and Humanities at the time. He had been the chair of the English department before that, and we were good friends. We'd been running together for a while and trained for marathons and things like that later. But Don, halfway up the hill, over there where the golf course used to be, and now where all the banks and the McDonald's is and all of that, we're halfway up that hill. And Don turns to me and says, what in the hell did you do to Herb Reinhard? And I said, Don, I don't have a clue. What am I supposed to have done to Herb Reinhard? And I didn't. I had zero awareness of anything I'd done that would bring. He said he just came into the executive committee with his executive committee, slammed his papers down. Half of them flew on the floor. He was so angry. And he said, "Who in the hell does this Ken Stewart think he is?" Okay. So I got a little temper in me too. And I said, "Well, Don, I'll tell him who the hell I am if he asks me to my face. I'll tell him I'm the GD head of the psychology department, and he owes me the respect of calling me before he reaches in to my department and takes away a faculty member that we need to do work for us." And Don said, "He'll fire you." And I said, "You're really telling me that he believes he can treat people that way and get away with it?" And he says he won't have a second thought about firing you. He won't, it will not even cross his mind that there are any implications that will affect him. Just like that. And I just shook my head. I said, "That's hard to believe, but okay, you know him, I don't. You know him better than I do." So that was me and Herb up to that point. Later, of course, things changed in interesting ways. I don't know whether you want to go on with that. Or...
Well, actually, I have another question. So despite this, negative interaction and Herb's anger at your memo, he actually ended up promoting you. So
yeah, he hired me as the dean.
Yes, he hired you as the dean. And before you were the chair, you mentioned you were the chair of the psychology department.
Right.
So can you talk about that experience?
Oh,
Why did he do that?
Al Rose was involved in that one too. I am sitting in my office when our then dean, Jim Cotton, had created a situation Herb didn't like. Herb fired him. And now we're doing a search for a dean of the School of Natural and Social Sciences. And Al comes to me and says, "You got to apply for the dean of your school." And I said, "No, I don't." I said, "I'm not even going to go close to that job." I said, "Why would I do all the things you need to do to apply for a dean job when I know very well Herb Reinhard probably hates me," or something like that. And he said, "If you apply, you'll get the job." I laughed at. I said, "Al, that just can't be." And he said, "It is." He says, "And besides that, you're the best person for the job." He said, "If the faculty committee selects you," and he said, "right now, you and one other person are our top choices." He said, "But if you're open to it, the odds are you're going to get it. And so the question is, do you want to apply?" He said, "We've been talking about you because even though you didn't put your name in the hat." And so reluctantly, I put together a brief package and applied. The struggle that went on within me about it was, okay, I was getting some things done within graduate studies and some things done within the fiscal committee that I really felt positive about. There seemed to me kinds of things that needed to be done, which is most of what I was about. Let's do the things we really need to do. And I really had not liked the way our school had been run. It was run top down, kind of in Herb style. And I had some ideas about a better way to do it. And I started thinking about my own ideas. And the most important thing was, okay, if you believe that's the way to be a dean, this is your chance to demonstrate it. That's what went on inside. And so I put together my little package and told some of my fellow faculty that I was applying. I didn't ask for any recommendations. 4 of the people I spoke to immediately wrote letters of recommendation. One of whom was the person who Herb had snatched up to work for Alice. She'd had enough of him, and she liked the idea of me sitting in between her and Herb. So that's how I applied for it. And it came down to the other person was a very good person and very deserving, and who later got the job. So that was a good thing. That was Joe Hoffman.
Mm-hmm.
Joe was a great department head and a terrific dean as well. And I couldn't say enough about the things he did. He came along after I did, and I just marveled at how he took many of the things that we talked about and he made them come to life. For example, the nursing program. That's Joe Hoffman. Joe stuck with that, and eventually we got it done. I did a lot of developing the relationships with the other institutions in a way that made our collaborations easier. Joe finished that one up after I retired. So those kinds of things. But anyway, the committee selected me, and I went to an interview. Herb calls me up and asked me to come over, and he offered me the job. And I decided I was going to have my say before I accepted. And I won't go on and on about it. But I told him, I said, before I accept this job, I'm going to say some things that you need to understand about me. And he looked puzzled, like he'd never heard of such a thing. You offer a man a job, and he tells you, I got to know something about him. And I said, I'm the kind of person that if I don't have mutual respect, me respecting you, you respecting me, I don't do the job. I quit. And that's what I'll do. If you ever disrespect me, then you'll have my resignation. I said, all you got to do is tell me I'm not doing the job the way you want it done. Now, if you do it that way, I resign. I'll go right back into the classroom and I'm happy. I said, but if you disrespect me, that won't happen. I said, I'll just say to hell with you. And so that was our negotiation. He looked like he didn't understand all of that. So I turned to some of my ideas about what I wanted to do with school. And he was not interested at all.
Why did he agree to hire you then?
He didn't want to object to what the committee wanted.
Oh, really?
Guess. Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Of course, there's always, you do understand with many people who sort of think the way Herb does, it's kind of like if you get them on the inside, you have more control. And I think that was part of it. He kind of liked to control people. And as a matter of fact, he liked controlling other people so much, he couldn't handle it when the other person was not being controlled. And as far as I'm concerned, that's one of the main reasons he resigned when he did. He didn't have control over what the faculty assembly was doing, the faculty senate was doing, I should say.
Yeah. So during your career here, you served under 3 presidents and 1 interim president. So comparatively, I could tell that you found Dr. Reinhard's presidential leadership abilities is very authoritarian. So could you talk a little bit, like a comparison between, we'll say, because you had mentioned Dr. Guild, Nelson P. Guild prior. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between Guild's leadership and Dr. Reinhard's leadership?
Yeah. I could talk as long about Nelson as I could about Herb, or longer. Nelson was a political scientist, and he was slippery.
Okay.
Yeah, at times Nelson was slippery. Um, in general, he did a good job. He came in at a time that, the institution was in really dire straits when Nelson took over. He was number two. He was the so-called dean of the college at the time. And he had gotten along well with the faculty, and the faculty, according to everything I know, the faculty liked Nelson a lot. But he also had a side to him that was, for my taste, it was too political and too slippery. He would kind of change what happened after the fact to suit his way of wanting you to look at it. And a good example of that, he, not all his fault, my department chair played his role in this. He and my department chair, Bob Grooms, and Nelson had a bad relationship. And like I say, Bob played his role, and part of that was, I think Bob felt that he was at least Nelson's equal. And maybe he felt like he should have been president. I don't know. I have no idea. Bob and I got along extremely well, and I did what he hired me to do. But he did kind of sour things between the department and Nelson. Nelson mistreated the department about having space to do our work in. He made promises that he didn't keep. Out of the blue, the most dramatic one that upset the department the most was he had promised us the space that the Appalachian Environmental Lab then got. And he had promised it to the whole department in a meeting where we were complaining about his more recent displacement of us, plus tearing down the only facility we had out back for our lab. We were doing some rat research outside of those regular classroom buildings, but they just tore it down, it was gone. And we didn't have a place to do that, and we were displaced over in the other place. And so the department was pretty upset. And like I say, Bob his leadership just showed full well that he was even more upset. So essentially, Bob quit pretty soon after all of that happened, and the department made me department head. And I decided that I was not going to fight with Nelson about space. What I was going to do was I'm going to have the department secure its own future. And by that, I meant we're going to make this a big program. They're going to have to pay attention. And I had resistance within our faculty about doing that. I had one faculty member who, the very day we went into the Giles Center, when the building is now built and we've got our new space, he said, they'll still give it somebody else. Anyway, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So it was that kind of thing. And just to make this a finer point, the man who actually created the Giles Center was with our old Board of Trustees of state colleges and universities, not the University of Maryland system. We were under the old system. His name was Ed Burnap. And the day that they announced, and they came on campus and they announced to Nelson and to us that they were going to build the Giles Center, and the center part of the new construction would be for the psychology department. There's 5 or 6 or 7 people together. Nelson and Ed are at the head of the pack. And I walk out my office door. I was going to meet them when they came up. Ed had called me and said, we're going to look at the grounds and talk about how things are going to be laid out. he pulled me over to the side with a subterfuge. He said, "Hey, Ken, I want you to see this tree over here we're going to preserve." And we split off from the others. They're talking, the architect, we were talking with Nelson and so on. And Ed said to me, full face, he said, "You do know you didn't get any help from your administration." And I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "We haven't had much help yet." And he said, "Your numbers built the building." He said, "We couldn't ignore it." He said, "Absolutely." He said, "You're one of the largest majors on campus now, and we haven't done anything for you. And now we have," just like that. And so that's how the Guile Center first got built. And later on, we were very happy with that and all of that. And the guy who said they'd never do anything for us was still saying they'll take it away from us when I gave him the first office.
Well, yeah, they didn't end up taking it away from you until this year.
Yeah.
So psychology
Well,
had
they
been
didn't
there,
take it
yeah.
away this year. I guess it served its purpose, and
Yeah.
and it had its problems. So
Yeah.
that's the way life is.
So yeah, now psychology, there's 2 different buildings they may be moving to because the Guile Center is closing this year.
Yeah.
Okay. So can you talk about your, it was the experience at the rally with Herb Reinhard, where I don't know if it was the commencement.
Oh, it was,
Yeah, it was a rally.
It was a rally welcoming the new freshman class.
Mm-hmm.
And Herb,
Convocation.
yeah, Herb liked his showmanship and so, all of that, but he liked the notion of him being the hard-nosed coach, and everybody else, had to kind of behave like you were some sort of player, and there's the coach, that kind of thing. So, as far as I'm concerned, what he did that particular day, I'm a brand new dean at this point, and he lines us up before he starts this show of his as his 11-man football team. And of course, he has his quarterback, who's Dan Panaleo, I think, by then. And he's got his deans and all of us and his other vice presidents and so on. So he's got us all assigned. He puts me at last and gives me the position of tight end. Okay. I'll leave it to whoever listens to this imagination about what he was trying to say about my personality, uptight or something like that. So I became the last person to be on the team and to be introduced. Well, the students are out in the audience, and the way he set it up, we were lined up over on this side. The students are all across here, and as we came up to Herb, he'd introduce us, and then we'd run to our positions on the team. And he had me last, which was all the way over here on the far side as tight end. And impulsively, when it came my turn, this is when I was running marathons and I could do stuff like this, I sprinted with my knees up around my ears, high kicking all the way across in front of the whole crowd. And the students they just exploded with applause. And just as the applause started to die down a little bit, some kids yelled out, "Oh my God!" like that, and everyone cheered again. And Herb was frowning.
He didn't like to be upstaged.
Yes, that's right. He didn't. And I frankly didn't care.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you described like Nelson P. Guile as slippery, and then you also, as that comparison.
Well, let me give you an example of the slippery. I forgot to give you that example.
Okay.
He changed from one meeting to the next with the department. He denied saying what he'd said.
Oh.
Okay? He said, you must have misunderstood me. I never said that. And the whole department, you got 9 people who heard him say it. So that's all I meant.
Yeah. And in comparison, maybe you wouldn't, I don't know if this is an assumption, but maybe you wouldn't describe Dr. Reinhard as slippery, but you kept describing him as what you see is what you get.
Yes,
that
that's right.
arrogance, and then
no slipperiness about Herb.
Yeah.
No, Herb was he was just the boss, and just with Brooke, no competition about that, or no resistance. He stressed everybody that worked for him, and there was a whole bunch of people who went on tranquilizers working for him.
Right.
And that's why at one place in my memoir, I said it was like working 3 years for anybody else, because there was so much stress produced by the way he managed people.
Yeah.
Which is, by the way, the very opposite of what you need to do in a higher education institution. My idea about administration with faculty or with department chairs as a dean or at any level within universities, the fundamental way to work with your colleagues is mutual respect. There is no substitute for that. You got to care as much about the other person being your equal in terms of just basic human respect. And I tried to be that way. And I think, by and large, nearly all of my success had to do with people seeing that I would listen and that I cared about listening. And it wasn't just about my ideas, even though I was stubborn as all get out if I had a better idea, but everybody knew that I listened. And that's how I changed the School of Natural and Social Sciences. What I basically did is, and this is what I planned to do, I turned the department heads. Before me, everything was done, dean to this head, dean to this head, dean to this head, and it was all one-on-one stuff. I made my 9 department chairs essentially an executive committee. And every change in anybody's curriculum or any new program was processed by the 9 department heads and myself. You bring your presentation of what you want done, first of all, to the school executive committee before you go to anything about the faculty, up the level, at a higher level. And so we processed everything. And so every new program that came out of the School of Natural and Social Sciences had to have been debated among all the departments. And so they critiqued each other and they began to learn about each other. And the best thing that came out of that, probably the best department head ever lived here on this campus, was Paul Hunt, who was the chair of chemistry. And out of everything that was said about me when I retired, the very best one was from Paul Hunt. And all he said to me was, the best thing you ever did, Ken, was put us all together. He said, I used to think social work was a pile of, he said, I didn't have a clue how hard it would be to do what they do, train those kids to do that kind of work. He said, that was priceless for me to learn that. He said, I learned that because you put us all together and made us learn about each other's programs. So that was the highest praise I got, was from a man that I really, really think was incredibly good.
Yeah, not completely top-down leadership, but an executive committee and collaboration. Okay, so let's jump to 1990, and I would like to briefly summarize the Reinhard scandal. In the latter half of 1990, it was discovered that money from the president's discretionary account, an FSU foundation fund, were used inappropriately for multiple political events and campaigns. In addition, Reinhard was accused of misappropriating the Grace S. Kopp Scholarship Fund for students. Reinhard denied all allegations and stated he knew nothing related to FSU Foundation political contributions. As a result, an official investigation was opened by the state of Maryland, and the Faculty Senate attempted to do a censure, which in modern terms is a vote of no confidence. They tried that twice, but neither time receiving enough votes to do it officially. The scandal was front page news of the Cumberland Times News for a number of issues between October and December of 1990. Afterwards, President Reinhard decided to resign on December 6, 1990, effective January 20, 1991. So can you please share what your role, or just your opinion?
How I saw all that?
Yeah, how you saw all that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Dan Pantaleo moved into the acting president job, and he had me become his replacement, the vice president for academic affairs interim. So Dan, I'm trying to figure out how to describe this. Dan had already decided he was leaving. As a matter of fact, he already had a job. He had already accepted a position at Lafayette College. But he had told no one. He was just he had done it. It was already put in place. He was getting ready to resign himself. And he said, essentially, I'm leaving. He said, I'm not surprised that Herb just flew the coop or something like that. He said he doesn't deal with frustration very well, something along that line. And he doesn't have the patience to deal with these kinds of things. So anyway, Dan says, you're going to become the interim VP for academic affairs, and if you'll accept it. And so I was moving into that role. And in that role, I did my own investigation about the Campaign for Excellence. Now, those other things, I don't know anything about the politics or, political contributions or tickets or anything like that. I know nothing about that. But I do know something about the Campaign for Excellence that I believed was part of why some of the newspaper folks persisted on it. In fact, I know one in particular. I think there was a newspaper called The Guardian at that time, a local small one, and they had been given some inside information by some of the faculty and had written their own stuff about Herb and the big scandal and so on. But I got the data together on the Campaign for Excellence because that's the money they're basically talking about. And I went through it, prepared a document that showed exactly where the so-called $1 million came from. And the donations added up to somewhere around, let's say, $650 million. I'm sorry, $650,000. And the electron microscope, the chair of biology and I had managed to get Walter Reed to donate, was valued at about $350,000. And so added up together, Herb could claim he had completed the Campaign for Excellence. So I thought maybe it was something about that knowing that was part of the picture. And after I prepared the analysis, I put it all in a table and showed everybody exactly what was going on, or so I could show. And I called the reporter who was, or I don't know whether he was the editor or the editor reporter, who had continued to write about it, and invited him to come look at the data. And he met with me, he looked at the data, and when he got to the part about the 350, he just said, oh, I see. And he said something like, nothing there, and walked out. Anyway, later, one of the two faculty who had been most after, going after Herb, who had kind of pushed it, not necessarily the one who did the interrogation with the Senate. As soon as he learned about that, he came to me. I showed it to him too. And he said, I had no idea you were going to catch all of this. He said, I'd never even have said a word about it if I knew this part of it, like that. And so that's a little part of the story that not many people knew about.
Yeah, that's good. I know that I'm certain it was the same back then, but I know that when the foundation does its capital campaigns, I think people have the assumption that it's all money. However, in-kind donations like the one you described also count towards the final goal, because they could say, we got to 1 million, where
exactly.
It's an optics type of thing, I guess.
It was a legitimate listing.
Right.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Okay, so I think we're kind of wrapping up. Do you have anything else you'd like to share? You want me to talk about either of the other presidents? I think I would like to save that till next time.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's fine.
Yeah. Part 2.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that because. Can I give them a teaser?
Yeah, of course. Let's give them a teaser.
I was in my backyard. I became the interim VP and worked for Harold Delaney for 6 months. And I was in my backyard. Harold was black. And my neighbor, one of my neighbors, came to my fence and said, well, how do you like your new boss? Something like that.
With a racist undertone, you would say.
Yeah, really sneering, yeah. And I said his first name, and I said, he's got to be the best boss I've ever had in my life. And so that was Harold Delaney.
Excellent.
And that was an absolute, heartfelt, had to say it. Absolutely had to say it. He's the one boss I ever had that backed me up every time I deserved it. And he did it with the chancellor of the system. He did it in every setting where it mattered on behalf of Frostburg State. So, yeah. Yeah,
in complete contrast. Yeah, Harold Delaney and Catherine Gira after him. Catherine was the last
people
president.
People didn't know that Harold had already served. For the state colleges and universities, he was their primary go-to interim president. He had already done 20 or 25 institutions when he came to Frostburg. They called on him every time they had a difficult circumstance to hold an institution together.
And he excelled at that.
Yeah, he was something else. He was super. And of course, I've written at length about him.
Yeah, we'll talk about him next time, I promise.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Ken. I really appreciate it. And I think we're done.